The scary part is not that someone controlling always looks dangerous. That would be convenient.
That would be cinematic.
That would at least give your nervous system a little red warning light before the ceiling starts coming down. But repeated control patterns usually arrive wearing good manners, soft eye contact, perfect timing, and that weirdly polished ability to become exactly what the room wants for 6 minutes. They laugh at the right point. They mirror your values.
They borrow your vocabulary like they found it in your coat pocket.
And for a while, the whole thing feels like connection. But underneath the performance, the architecture is different. There is image control instead of intimacy.
There is affection that works like a cost-benefit receipt.
There is public warmth and private coldness.
Which is basically emotional customer service with the lights off.
That contrast matters. Because the camouflage is not random, it is a template. A person can seem socially fluid while remaining structurally unreachable. They can scan the room beautifully and still never let the room touch them. And that is the defense paradox. The same charm that makes you feel chosen may also be the wall that keeps you from ever getting inside.
So the first pattern is not they are charismatic. That is too lazy.
The pattern is this: their warmth has a job. And once the job is done, the temperature changes. Then comes the part that makes people doubt themselves because the behavior does not explode immediately. It accumulates small things, tiny little pressure tests. A joke that crosses a boundary, followed by a smile that asks, "What, you can't take a joke?" A favor that feels affectionate, but somehow leaves you owing them interest. A confession you shared in softness that later reappears in an argument with suspiciously sharp edges. That is not intimacy, that is information leverage wearing a sweater. And this is where the baseline programming of the relationship starts to shift. Your nervous system begins treating every interaction like a hallway where the lights might flicker.
You watch tone, you watch timing.
You watch whether the public version matches the private version. That is hypervigilance. Not being too sensitive, just the body noticing that the floor plan keeps changing. In a healthy attachment structure, closeness lowers threat. In this kind of structure, closeness can become the delivery system for threat. That is the ugly little betrayal hidden inside the template. The place that was supposed to feel safe becomes the place where you start scanning hardest. And once that happens, your internal calibration gets hijacked. You stop asking, "Is this behavior okay?" You start asking, "Can I survive the mood shift if I name it?" That is how control becomes environmental.
Not one dramatic villain speech, not a lightning strike.
More like a ceiling slowly lowering until everyone pretends crawling is normal. And then your brain does the most human, irritating, heartbreaking thing possible. It tries to reconcile the impossible. Because part of you remembers the soft version, the version that listened, the version that acted protective, the version that made you feel like finally, someone understood the weird blueprint of your inner world. And another part of you remembers the colder version.
The one who displaced every apology into a lecture about your reaction.
The one who turned conflict into a stage. The one who seemed activated by your confusion, like your distress gave the room more oxygen. That oscillation is brutal. Warm, cold, tender, punishing, present, gone. And because the pattern is intermittent, your mind keeps hunting for the missing instruction manual. Maybe you said it wrong. Maybe you asked too directly. Maybe you were needy. Maybe you imagined the whole thing. No, that is the trapdoor. When someone uses rehearsed empathy, consequence-focused remorse, and affection that appears right after distance, your nervous system can start mistaking relief for love.
That is not because you are foolish.
That is because inconsistency is addictive when safety has been rationed.
The brain becomes a little gambler at a broken slot machine, pulling the lever for the version of them that once felt real.
And betrayal trauma makes the whole thing even messier. Because if the person who hurts you is also the person you depend on emotionally, the mind may suppress the obvious data just to keep the attachment from collapsing. So the framework is not about calling everyone a psychopath because they had one bad Tuesday. That is nonsense with a podcast microphone. The framework is recurrence, image management, boundary testing, apology, displacement, information leverage, public-private contrast, conflict activation, rehearsed empathy. Intermittent reinforcement, remorse that appears only when consequences arrive. One trait is a moment. A repeated template is architecture. And once the pattern is repeated long enough, your own reactions start looking confusing from the outside. One day you are silent, not peaceful silent, more like emotional basement silent. Door locked, lights off, nobody gets in. The next day, you are asking questions with the intensity of a courtroom cross-examination. Because some tiny shift in their tone just lit up the whole internal alarm system. Why did you say it like that? What did you mean by that? Why were you warm yesterday and weird today? And then you hate yourself for sounding like the problem. That is the cruelest part. When someone keeps bending the walls, the person measuring the room starts looking unstable. But the reaction makes sense. If your early signals were repeatedly dismissed, mocked, or overwritten, you learn to outsource reality. You start collecting external data like receipts. A sudden burst of sweetness after coldness. A public compliment that arrives 5 minutes after a private cut. Your scanning becomes precise, almost too precise. But your internal calibration becomes wrecked. Because you can read the temperature of the room, but you no longer trust yourself to say the room is on fire. So behavior starts splitting, quarantine or surveillance, distance or interrogation, disappear or decode. That is not weakness. That is attachment trying to protect itself with whatever tools were left in the drawer. And yes, sometimes the tools are ugly, sometimes they are loud. They came from living inside a relational architecture where the rules kept changing, and somehow, you were always blamed for noticing. The hard part is that recognizing the template does not instantly free you from it. Because the body is annoying like that, it does not update because you had one intelligent realization at 2:13 a.m. Insight helps, but insight is not the same as reconstruction. The old architecture was built through repetition, so the new one does not arrive through one dramatic declaration either. It arrives through consistency so boring it almost feels suspicious. No sudden punishment. No emotional invoice after kindness. No affection that disappears the moment you stop being useful. Just repeated low-drama evidence that a boundary can exist without the whole building collapsing. At first, that kind of steadiness can feel wrong, too quiet, too plain, too suspiciously normal. Because when your system is used to oscillation, peace can feel like a missing chapter. You may wait for the hook, the switch, the betrayal behind the calm voice. And that waiting is not stupidity. It is old hypervigilance doing its shift. But slowly, the nervous system starts learning a new map. Someone respects a no and does not punish it later. Someone hears discomfort and does not turn it into your character flaw. Someone stays basically the same in public and private, which should not feel revolutionary, but after enough emotional circus nonsense, it absolutely does. That is how the template gets rewritten. Not by pretending the past did not happen. Not by becoming magically chill. But by gathering enough repeated evidence that control is not the price of closeness. The goal is to recognize recurrence. A single bad mood is not architecture. But repeated boundary testing, repeated public-private contrast, that is architecture. And once you can see the blueprint, you stop arguing with wallpaper. You look at the structure, and the structure tells you what kind of house you are standing in. Because some walls were built for a reason, but not every wall has to become a permanent address. If this kind of pattern language helps you, stay close. There is more to map.